It's football at 4. So let's bring Johnny Mack into the equation here on the Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN. Johnny Mack, what's going on, man?
Doing well. How are you guys enjoying South Florida?
The weather is nice. Thank gosh that we are right next to the Old Spice stand. I've had to hit it up a few times.
That's a good sponsor. You should work on that.
I'm trying. All right, Roger Goodell speaks today, and that's really the big news from Super Bowl 54. We'll get into the game, but there's a lot that we should dive into regarding the NFL and what's coming up next as Roger Goodell kind of gives his state of the league. I thought at the top of the list, I feel like he feels that Antonio Brown needs some help here, and I find that that's a very interesting kind of side piece, because if he's kind of coming out and saying this guy's got some mental health issues potentially, isn't that just mental health issues that could potentially have stemmed from playing his game?
Well, people are going to spin it that way, and you have, we just saw a couple really high-profile documentaries with Aaron Hernandez. Netflix did one, ID Discovery. And anything, obviously that's to an extreme when you have someone who goes off the rails to the point Aaron Hernandez did and essentially becomes a spree killer. And people point to CTE. And anytime you have these issues with football players, you always have that certain line. There's a lot of football players that have played this game. And whether you want to talk about suicides, you want to talk about personal off the rails, all sample size that have played this game. That's not to say head injuries aren't significant. They're very significant. Clear there are other issues at play, and I think sort of dichotomy that people can't get past, and you have to contributing instead of cause or contribute. I think that's more fair. And I think that's a give and take, but you have lobbies. You see it about sports in the political world. That's what you have, lobbies, and there are lobbies for everything. That's why problems like that are.
Yeah, he kind of avoided a potential return to the league, looking at him as he is not a part of NFL's future. Kurt, did you get that vibe today?
Well, certainly not short term. I mean, if you think about last year, there were people in Philadelphia clamoring, why don't you bring in Antonio Brown? And we said on the show a bunch of times, look, there are some significant off-the-field issues, and you've seen them develop even further as we've gone down the road. So the Eagles, I think rightfully so, were never interested in even thinking about going down that avenue. He's got to fix his personal life before he can get back into the NFL mix, and I think that's what Roger Goodell is trying to say. This is far bigger than football. This is a guy that has significant personal issues, and I think anytime you see that play out in public view, and that's what you've seen, it's always a little bit sad.
John, it's Scott. Good to talk to you. One other thing that Goodell was talking about that kind of perked my attention a little bit was with the CBA. I know they're going to kind of play the game here and kind of not try to ruffle the other side's feathers too much. He said everything's moving along at a decent pace, what he was inferring. But then you hear from the Players Association, and they're kind of talking about with this CBA that if they don't get what they want, they could be looking at a 2-year strike. Where do you see this standing if you kind of parse through all the words? Where do you see this CBA talk standing at this point?
I don't think we're going to have a strike. I don't even think we're going to have a lockout. I think it will get done. I think there will be an extension, hopefully relatively soon. After
17 games or no?
Super Bowl. 17 games, yeah. Everything has been negotiating off that platform of a 17-game season. And anytime you have negotiations and things like CBAs, there's a lot of white noise, I like to call it. And the ancillary issues, you hear a lot of that stuff. But the bottom line is revenue split. If the players get the revenue split they want, all the other stuff kind of evaporates and goes into the wind. But you use things like marijuana testing as jockeying back and forth. If you give up that, we'll give you this, and that's how it goes. But the first and foremost issue on everybody's mind is that revenue split. And when you talk about 2 years, I mean, look, from a player standpoint, you try to use all the leverage you have, and you can talk about that. But nobody in this league is prepared. They try to warn them, set up savings, be prepared. Nobody can last 2 years, especially when you talk about certain players who have a certain standard of living. You talk about young players who don't make as much money but have mortgages and families and jobs. That kind of stuff is not going to happen. So that's more leverage than anything else.
Goodell also talked about, kind of the worldwide aspect of the game. More talk about London, possibly at some point getting a team. He kind of still is, poo-pooing that until they can figure out logistically how to make that work. Toronto was mentioned as a possible place to put an NFL franchise.
They indicated they need a new stadium there.
Yeah, he said they need a new stadium. And then they're talking about still playing he said they will play a game this year and next year in Mexico City. So it kind of, if you can, John, just kind of give us some insight on the worldwide aspect of the NFL and what Goodell is ultimately trying to get done here.
Well, he's trying to open up new revenue streams, which is understandable because at some point you talk about saturation of the North American market and how much higher can you go and sort of wringing every last dollar out of this particular market, which is still by far the most popular sport, obviously, in the United States. So to open up foreign markets has always been very big. You're right on the logistics standpoint. It's just not possible to have a team in London. The travel would be atrocious. So I think the goal is to play a full season in London, revolving teams. So in other words, you have 17 games in London, but with each team, each team's revolving week after week after week. If you're talking about international teams, yeah, Toronto is much more likely because of the easy schedule. If you can figure out a stadium situation. I think it's interesting. One of the problems I've always had in the NFL, and I don't think it's a very forward-thinking organization. I think it's more reactive than proactive. And I think Rogers spoke for 37 minutes today, which is far less than normal on these types of things. Nobody asked him about officiating. And this is not about officiating during the season. Now, obviously, people hate it. It's been a big problem. But my question to people in the NFL, and I've asked this before, and I can't get an answer from anybody because I don't think they think about it. This sport is so complicated, and I've mentioned it on the show. If you don't grow up with it, you can't understand it. So I think that's the problem with the NFL when you talk about foreign markets, when you talk about Europe, when you talk about China, which everybody wants to get into. Those people cannot understand this game because of the over-legislation. And I don't think anybody in the NFL realizes that.
Yeah, I mean, do they look at the NBA and just say, hey, it's working for them in other countries. It's got to work for us and not, and hope that they don't care about the rules.
Exactly. They look at the NBA and they see the worldwide popularity. They see the popularity they have in China, which is the biggest untapped market for just about every business. And they say, why not us? Well, basketball is easily translatable. It's very easy to understand. It's one of the reasons soccer is worldwide the most popular sport. It's really easy to understand. Professional football, NFL, American football, is not easy to understand. You might not look at that as someone who's grown up to the game, but pretend you're from another country. You have never seen this sport before and compare it to soccer or basketball or even ice hockey. Simple games that are easily relatable. That is not the National Football League.
Yeah. So how is it being received over there? I mean, do the fans just go to because it's a place to go? Is it something that they're – I mean, because it doesn't seem that you say they can't have a team there, right? They're not going to put one team there. It just doesn't seem logistically it would work. So how is it being received when there's just all these different teams coming in? Is it just really, hey, let's fill the stadium and go to these games, or are those stadiums being filled by the fan bases that are flying there? They're not filling that place up with people that are flying from the States there, right?
Yeah, I mean, no. It's very popular as a niche sport in London, and my wife has a lot of friends over there. But it is not at the forefront. So one of the reasons they're all sellouts and everybody gets excited, and if you go to a London game, you'll see jerseys from every team. So it's not a typical we're Jaguars fans. You'll see fans just of the NFL all going to see the product. The problem with that is and they've slowly increased from 1 game, 2 games, 4 games, and now they're talking about a whole season. All of a sudden that specialness wears off. Are you going to have trouble selling tickets if it's a weekly event and it's not so special? And that's something we'll have to see. I do think it will affect their ability to fill those stadiums on a consistent basis.
When you talk about the marketability of the NFL versus the NBA, for me, and I know we've talked about this before, John, but it's about the athlete and their individual marketing, right? Like social media with the NBA, the stars control the league. People watch the NBA all across the world because of the individual stars. How do you anticipate the NFL improving that to really maybe improve the international landscape?
Yeah, I don't know if that's the bigger problem. I talked about that. We talked about that after Kobe's death, unfortunately, and the difference between the NBA and the NFL essentially is the NBA markets individuals, the NFL markets teams. So I think it's just a different way. I don't think that affects them. In fact, long term, I think it's better to market teams because if you have Philadelphia would be the perfect example of that. You have this diehard fan base. Obviously, players are going to change from year to year, generation to generation. The Philadelphia Eagles are the Philadelphia Eagles, whereas, and you've seen it, again, perfect example in Philadelphia, you've seen the depths of basketball when there are no stars. You've seen how low it can go. And, yeah, when there are stars like there are now, it's very high. But the Sixers aren't the Eagles, in other words. They're not strong. They can't continue that pace unless they put out stars on the floor. So I think from that standpoint, the NFL has it right. I think it's better to strengthen the actual organizations than individuals because sports are cyclical. And every superstar has a shelf life. And if you have an organization that people are loyal to versus a star, you're better off from a business perspective.
Just to carry this for another minute or two, though, John, like for me, you're right in that sense, but I'll say the stars will reel the international fans in, and then you have loyalty to the brand, meaning the NBA. So Kobe retires. I mean, that's a horrible example right now. Sorry for lack of a better one, but so-and-so retires, and then, there's Devin Booker. Oh, there's Luka Doncic. Oh, there's Trae Young.
We don't have that in the NFL, though.
That's my point.
We're in a place right now that literally there are NFL players walking all over the place, and you're constantly like, who's that over there?
Correct.
Who's that over there?
Right, and that's why, and John brings up a good point about the team loyalties, but, the Eagles aren't always going to be good. And in 6 years, when they start stinking for a few years, that brand loyalty is not going to be as easy to, stick with, I think, if you're living over in China or somewhere else.
Well, yeah, that part you can turn it around and say you could build it that way and build the brand of the NBA, NFL versus individual teams. So, you can accomplish goals from different avenues and different perspectives. I suppose, one of the problems with the NFL, and they've said this in the past, is, these guys have helmets on their head. So it's really tough from a TV perspective to get to know them, whereas you see the NBA and you see the emotion and the close-ups of the play with good, bad, indifferent. You get to know the personalities of the players, so it is easier to market just from the natural aspects of the game. But, as I said, you mentioned some of the young stars in the NBA. They're not Kobe Bryant. So, I mean, we always talk about, and I mentioned that earlier in the week, once in a generation means once in a generation. Ben Simmons is great. Joel Embiid are great. They're not Michael Jordan. They're not Kobe Bryant. They're not looked upon that way. They don't transcend sports. So even in an industry like an NBA, it's really, really hard to get those types. And they don't come around every year.
Hey, John, obviously it would be remiss if we didn't talk to you about the whole reason we're even down here, the Super Bowl. When you look at this matchup, the spread is pretty tight. You got a lot of different kind of things that polar opposites, if you will. I mean, the Chiefs are what they are on offense. The Niners are what they are on defense. You got Andy Reid, of course, looking for that first Super Bowl. You got Shanahan trying to ditch the monkey off his back from the 28-3 lead blown. How do you see this game playing out? How do you read this Super Bowl going, and does Andy Reid get that ring?
Yeah, I do think he does. I've been pretty consistent, and I think it's just the modern brand of football. And I've compared the Chiefs to the old St. Louis Rams, the Kurt Warner Rams, the greatest show on turf Rams. They're just so explosive offensively. They keep coming at you. It's almost like a wave. And you saw it in the playoffs, down 24 points. I mean, typically, if you're down 24 points in the NFL, game's over. You don't have a chance. This team won by 20, it being down by 24. So the explosiveness of that team is going to be difficult to deal with from San Francisco's perspective. I think they'd have to play a near-perfect game defensively to win it. And when the margin of error is that small, and I think it is for the 49ers, you think offensively how they've gotten here late in the season in the playoffs with the running game. Kind of mentioned it with Mike when the Chiefs were playing the Titans. You got to play a specific way. And the margin of error is very, very small. And if you get down by 2 scores, game's over.
Johnny Mack, football at 4, man. As always, we'll have you all week with the more on the NFL. Appreciate the time as always.
All right, thanks, guys.